Now, there are some other kinds of sweeteners that get added to products, and they're a little bit different to these artificial sweeteners we've just been talking about. So a couple of the things that you might see are alcohol sugars and also stevia. So we're going to have a quick look at alcohol sugars first, and then we're going to get in and talk a little bit about stevia, because that's also an additive that's showing up in a lot of different foods at the moment. Now, alcohol sugars they're an interesting category of food, if you like, an interesting substance. Now, generally speaking, your body can't digest them very well. Now, this is one of the reasons why they tend to have lower calories, because we can't process everything that's there. Now, alcohol sugars are somewhere between artificial and natural, and I say that because they actually do occur naturally in fruits and berries. But the interesting thing is that they don't impact blood sugar like sugar does. So they still taste sweet, but they don't have that same blood sugar impact, and they won't have the same insulin response. Even if there is a small one, it's not going to be like it would be if there was the full sugar dose in that kind of product. Now, alcohol sugars come up in questions that I receive almost on a weekly basis, actually, and the reason is that they get used a lot in these kinds of more modern packaged foods, for example, like protein bars, especially in low-carb protein bars, but they also get used in other products as well. Now, they may cause some gas, some bloating, maybe some loose bowels, and they could also irritate existing problems. So I want you to be really, really careful around them, for example, if you have irritable bowel syndrome. Now, they tend, all of them, to ferment a little in the lower bowel, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because a lot of other substances do the same thing in your lower bowel every day. But it's just good to be aware of that, and that's what tends to cause some of that gas and bloating. Now, there are different kinds of alcohol sugars, and I'm just going to mention some of the more common ones. So we have xylitol, sorbitol, erythritol, maltitol, mannitol, lactitol, and isomalt. Now, there are other ones you'll see on ingredients labels, but generally speaking, if you see something that looks like this, with a TOL on the end, it's probably some kind of alcohol sugar. Now, most of them are similar in terms of, they have little effect on blood sugar and insulin. Some of them more so, some of them less so. But I want to pick out a few in particular and just give you a little bit of more information about them, because they tend to be the more popular ones. So I'm going to skip over xylitol and sorbitol. They've got a GI of around 10, both of them, which is very, very low, which means it has a low impact on your blood sugar. But the first one I'd really like to chat about is erythritol. Now, this is quite different to some of the other ones. It's quite unique, actually. It has a GI of 0, but it's actually quite sweet. It tastes similar to real sugar, and generally speaking, at regular consumption levels, you don't find any gastrointestinal distress. And there's a few reasons for that, but generally speaking, the biggest reason is that your body can actually ingest erythritol, and it circulates through your body, and then it gets excreted again. So that's different to some of the other alcohol sugars which stay in your bowel system the whole time. So this kind of alcohol sugar doesn't actually ferment in the lower bowel, so you don't get that gas and that kind of bloating that you might get with some of the others. The next very common one that you'll see on all kinds of different products is maltitol. Now, its GI is quite a lot higher than some of the others, and that's why I want to mention it, or that's one of the reasons. It has a GI of around 36, but it is the closest to real sugar. It only has half as many calories as regular sugar, as compared to some of the others that have much less calories, but it has a really creamy texture, so it gets used in large amounts in commercially produced foods. But it can result in some gas, some bloating, that kind of thing, generally speaking, because there's a lot used. So it's a good idea to be aware of maltitol, and generally it's one that I tend to steer clear of. Now, some of the others like mannitol and lactitol, they're similar in terms of how sweet they taste and how much gets used and their kinds of effects. But one of the interesting ones is isomalt, and that's because it doesn't absorb moisture. So it's used in hard candies, and especially because it doesn't lose its sweetness when it's heated. So isomalt is one you'll see in some of those, for example, more natural diabetic candies that you might see on the shelf, and it might also be used in some other kinds of products where they need a sweetener that can be heated. So that's alcohol sugars, and in general terms, I don't think they're a really bad thing, but it probably means that you're looking at food that's very, very overly processed. And, generally speaking, with this lifestyle, you will get the best fat loss results, and you will get the best health, for that matter, by having whole food meals. So realistically, if you see a low-carb bar on the shelf or, somewhere like that, maybe in a gas station, for example, and you're really in a tight situation, something along these lines that uses an alcohol sugar as its sweetener, it's not such a bad thing. But it's definitely not something that I would actively recommend, and I wouldn't suggest that you have a bar, for example, that has this alcohol sugar in it more than once a week, realistically. Now, another sweetener that we haven't talked about yet, and it actually has almost its own category, is stevia. Now, stevia has absolutely no blood sugar impact whatsoever. It's actually derived from a plant. So the plant is natural to South America, and stevia, or sweet leaf, as it has been known, has been used down in South America for literally hundreds upon hundreds of years as a sweetener. Now, stevia is a really, really good example of a natural alternative that might be worth considering as an alternative to artificial sweeteners, just as much as an alternative to regular sugar. Now, stevia is popping up more and more, and it can easily be found in low-calorie or low-carbohydrate food products. A lot of protein bars, for example, are starting to catch on to using stevia, but they're also using it in other places, for example, in pop, sort of soda drinks, and also, for example, in chocolate. So a couple of these are a pop drink called Zevia, and also I found a few examples of some stevia-sweetened dark chocolate that's available, which I've tested, and it actually tastes really good. Now, stevia is under investigation, it's under research, I should say, because it might have some health benefits. And some of those benefits could, for example, be insulin sensitivity, meaning that you actually release less insulin into your body. And it might also help what we call blood glucose clearance after a meal. And put simply, that's basically how long does it take for your blood sugar level to come back down to normal after you've eaten. So it might help speed that up, which is a good thing. Now, there's also potentially some benefits to cholesterol when it's combined with a kind of fiber called inulin. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. And in mice, for example, who are treated with stevioside, which is the technical chemical name, there were some benefits in cholesterol, in plaque volume as well, and also in insulin sensitivity. So you can see there's some interesting research that's going on, and there's also been some research that shows that it may help with blood pressure too. So in conclusion, as far as stevia goes, I feel personally that it's a great alternative to artificial sweeteners and also a good alternative to sugar. That said, I still don't go filling up every day with these kind of sweetened products because I prefer to find my taste in other kinds of flavors. And I find that the more sweet products I eat, the less I tend to taste of all these other interesting flavors that you can get from vegetables and from herbs and spices and that kind of thing. But I do use stevia, or I use stevia-based products a few times a week probably, and I haven't observed any kinds of negative impacts in terms of fat loss or, in terms of any kind of upset stomach or anything along those lines. So stevia comes quite well recommended from me, but not just from me, from a lot of other people in the health community.